"I'm not a virgin," she said, but the cowboy took her hand and said, "I never asked you to be." The wind rolled low across the Wyoming plains, carrying with it the smell of dust and dry grass. It was early, too early for anyone to be out, and the sky was still holding on to that pale grey before sunrise. The kind of morning where the world felt empty, as if it hadn't decided yet whether to wake up or not. Ethan Cole sat on the edge of his porch, a chipped enamel mug warming his hands. He was a man who had learned to live with silence. The kind of silence that didn't just fill the air, it lived inside him. Out here, 20 miles from the nearest town, silence was the only constant. The ranch spread out in all directions, fences leaning tiredly into the wind, the barn roof sagging under years of weather. Somewhere, a loose shutter tapped against the cabin wall. Ethan sipped his coffee slowly, eyes wandering over the dirt road that cut across the horizon. That's when he saw it. A figure, small, walking where no one should be walking. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, the way dawn blurred shapes. But as the figure drew closer, his gut tightened. It was a girl, young, barefoot, the hem of her dress torn, dust clinging to her legs. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ground in front of her, as though each step cost her something. She moved like someone who had been walking all night. Ethan stood, setting the mug down on the porch rail. He didn't call out. Years had taught him that some people ran if you spoke too soon. When she reached the fence, she stopped. One hand rested lightly on the top wire, and she looked up at him for the first time. Her face was pale, lips chapped, hair tangled and hanging to one side. There was something in her eyes, not fear exactly, but the hollow look of someone who had already lived through the worst thing that could happen to them. Ethan walked down the steps, slow, boots crunching over the dirt. She swallowed, as though working up the courage to speak. Her voice, when it came, was raw and quiet. "I'm not a virgin." The wind carried the words away almost as soon as they left her mouth. Ethan stopped a few feet away, watching her. Not with shock, not with judgment, just watching. "I never asked you to be," he said finally, voice steady. And for a moment, in the pale light of morning, neither of them moved. The silence between them felt like the only safe place left in the world. She didn't move when he stepped closer. Her hands hung at her sides, fingers stiff from the cold. He could see the faint bruising along her wrist, like someone had held on too hard for too long. The knuckles of her left hand were scraped raw. Ethan had seen marks like that before, not here on the ranch, but years ago, in places where law and mercy didn't always reach. He forced himself not to look away. "What's your name?" he asked. She shook her head. Not a no, just a refusal to answer. He leaned his forearms on the fence, studying her in the quiet. She didn't shiver, though the air had bite in it. She didn't cry, though her eyes were red at the edges. She just stood. He'd been around animals long enough to know the signs of something cornered. This wasn't the kind of fear that made you run. This was the kind that froze you solid. A flicker of memory pressed at the back of his mind. A boy, himself, smaller, thinner, standing at the edge of his father's porch, holding his own bruised wrist. His mother in the doorway, eyes swollen from crying. His father's voice, sharp as barbed wire, telling him to man up before slamming the door shut. Ethan blinked, and the memory was gone, leaving behind only the familiar weight in his chest. "You hungry?" he asked. The girl's gaze drifted toward the cabin, then back to the dirt. No answer. He told himself it wasn't his problem. She could be trouble, could be running from something that would follow. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to point her toward the road and let her keep walking. Let the sheriff in town figure it out. He had fences to mend, cattle to check, a life that didn't need strangers bleeding into it. But as he looked at her, he saw the set of her shoulders, the way she was holding herself upright, not because she was fine, but because she refused to fall apart in front of anyone. That was something he understood too well. He pushed open the gate and stepped aside. "You can come in if you want, or keep going. Your call." For a moment she didn't move. Then, slow as the sun climbing the horizon, she stepped through. Inside the cabin, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. She stopped just past the door as if unsure whether she belonged there. He nodded toward the table. "Sit, I'll make something." When he set a plate of eggs and bread in front of her, she didn't thank him. didn't look at him, just ate. Quick, quiet, like someone who knew better than to waste a meal. Ethan poured another cup of coffee and sat across from her. He didn't ask again where she'd come from. Not yet. In his mind, the debate had already been settled. He'd seen too many people turned away when they needed someone to stand between them and whatever was coming. He wasn't about to be one of those people. It was after she'd finished eating, after she'd pushed the plate away and sat with her hands folded in her lap, that Ethan finally asked, "Who were you walking from?" She hesitated, looked toward the window as if measuring how far the horizon was. Then quietly, "My stepfather." The words were flat, without the rise or fall of emotion, but something in the way she said them made Ethan's stomach knot. What happened? "He sold me," she said, eyes still on the glass. "To a man in town. Said I owed him for the roof over my head." Ethan felt the air shift between them. A slow, heavy quiet. Sold. The word lodged itself in his chest like a nail. "Where's your mother?" he asked. "Dead." Her voice didn't crack. No tears. Just a fact she'd probably had to repeat more times than anyone should. He leaned back in his chair, watching her, and something old and ugly rose in him. The same helpless anger he'd carried years ago, when he'd seen a neighbor's boy taken by a drunk father in the middle of the night. Nobody had stopped it then. Nobody had even tried. Outside, a pickup engine rumbled faintly in the distance. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the window. The sound was coming from the south road, the one most folks didn't take unless they had a reason. "You expecting someone?" the girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No." The truck came into view a minute later, crawling along the dirt road. 2 men inside, one driving, the other sitting too straight, eyes scanning the open land. Ethan recognized the passenger. Briggs Mather, mean as they came, known for doing collections for men who didn't like the law getting involved. He didn't need to ask why they were here. Ethan stood, moving to the coat rack. "Go into the back room, stay low. Don't come out unless I tell you." The girl froze. "They'll find me?" "Not if you listen," he said, his voice firm now. She hesitated for just a moment before slipping down the narrow hall. Ethan heard the soft click of the door closing. By the time Briggs's truck rolled up, Ethan was on the porch, hat pulled low, hands resting easy at his sides. Briggs stepped out, boots kicking up dust. "Morning, Cole." Ethan nodded once. "Briggs. Got word a girl came through here. Belongs to a friend of mine. He's worried sick." "Funny," Ethan said, his voice flat. She didn't look like she belonged to anyone. Briggs's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She's underage. Been in some trouble. Not safe for her out here alone." Ethan didn't answer right away. The wind carried the dry smell of sagebrush between them. "I haven't seen her," he said finally. Briggs studied him for a long moment, like a man deciding how much trouble he was willing to start before breakfast. Then he tipped his hat. "If you do, you know where to find me." They left, the truck's tires spitting gravel down the road. Ethan stood watching until the sound faded, knowing they'd be back. And next time, they might not knock. The next 2 days passed in a strange kind of quiet. Briggs hadn't come back yet, but Ethan knew that didn't mean much. Men like him didn't quit easy. The girl, she still hadn't told him her name, stayed mostly in the back room at first. She'd slip into the kitchen when she thought he wasn't looking, refill her plate, pour water from the jug, and retreat again. But little by little, she began to linger. It started the morning he found her standing by the barn, watching him fix a loose fence post. She didn't say anything, just watched. Hair hanging into her face, hands tucked into the sleeves of the shirt he'd given her. "You ever handle a rifle?" he asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. He motioned her over. "Come on. If you're going to be out here, you need to know how to take care of yourself." She stepped closer, cautious, but curious. He showed her the .22 first. Small, light, easy to manage. His voice stayed low as he explained the basics. How to check the chamber, how to line up the sights, how to breathe before squeezing the trigger. When she fired the first shot, the sound cracked across the open field. She flinched, but didn't drop the gun. "Again," he said. By the third shot, her hands were steadier. He saw it, the faintest spark in her eyes. Not joy exactly, something more like relief, like she'd just remembered she had some control over her own life. That night, after supper, they sat outside on the porch. The sky was wide and full of stars, the kind that seemed to press down on you in the dark. She spoke first. "He wasn't always like that, my stepfather. After my mom died, he just stopped caring about anything. Started drinking. I think he wanted to hurt someone because he couldn't hurt her for leaving." Ethan didn't answer right away. He could have told her about his own father, about the nights when silence in their house wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet before a storm, about the day he'd left and never looked back. Instead, he rolled up his sleeve, showing her the pale scar running along his forearm. "Fence wire," he lied softly. It wasn't, but some truths were too heavy to hand over all at once. She traced the scar lightly with her finger, not asking for more. The next day they worked side by side, mending fence, feeding horses, sweeping out the barn. She didn't complain, even when blisters formed on her palms. And when he caught her humming softly while brushing down one of the mares, something inside him eased in a way he hadn't felt in years. That evening, they shared coffee by the fire. No words, just the crackle of the wood and the slow rhythm of breathing. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters. But inside the cabin it was warm. It felt for a moment like they were safe. Ethan knew it wouldn't last. Safety was never more than borrowed time. But sitting there, watching the firelight flicker across her face, he let himself believe, just for a little while, that maybe they could outrun what was coming. It was just after dawn when Ethan heard the sound. Not the low hum of a truck in the distance. This was closer, louder, multiple engines. He stepped onto the porch and saw them. 2 trucks coming down the road, dust rising behind them like a warning. Briggs was in the first, leaning out the window with a grin that didn't belong to a man making a friendly visit. Ethan didn't call for her. She was already standing in the doorway behind him, eyes fixed on the approaching vehicles. "They found us," she whispered. "Go to the back room," he said. She didn't move. "Now!" Reluctantly, she stepped back into the cabin. He heard the creak of the floorboards as she disappeared down the hall. The truck stopped 20 yards out. 4 men stepped down. Briggs, his driver, and 2 others. One carried a shotgun. The other had a length of chain coiled in his hand. Briggs called out, "Morning, Cole. Thought we'd stop by and collect what belongs to us." Ethan stepped off the porch, closing the distance until they were 10 yards apart. "She's not yours." Briggs tilted his head. "Not yours either. And you know how this goes. You keep her. You make yourself part of the problem. You don't want that." Ethan's hand rested lightly on the rifle slung over his shoulder. "You'll have to go through me." Briggs chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You think I won't?" The man with the chain shifted, impatient. The one with the shotgun glanced toward the cabin door. Ethan's voice dropped low, steady as bedrock. "Try it." For a long moment, no one moved. The wind pressed against them, carrying the dry scent of sage and dust. Then Briggs spoke again, his words meant to cut. "She didn't tell you, did she? About the man she was sold to? That man's my brother." Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. "She ran after the first night," Briggs continued, his grin widening. "And my brother, well, let's just say he wants her back in one piece. Alive but not untouched." The air between them seemed to harden. Ethan took one slow step forward. "She's not going anywhere with you." Briggs's eyes flicked to the man with the shotgun. "Bring her out." Before the man could move, Ethan's rifle came up. The first shot cracked through the morning air, kicking dust at the man's boots. "Next one won't miss," Ethan said, voice cold. The standoff stretched. 4 against 1. Bad odds, and they all knew it. But something in Ethan's stance made them hesitate. Men like Briggs understood risk, and right now, the risk was staring them down with the calm of someone who'd already decided what he was willing to lose. Finally, Briggs spat into the dirt. "This ain't over." He signaled to the others, and they climbed back into the trucks. Ethan didn't lower his rifle until the last speck of dust from their taillights disappeared. Inside, she was waiting in the hall, fists clenched, eyes wide. "They'll come back," she said. Ethan set the rifle on the table. "Then we'll be ready." He didn't tell her the truth, that he'd just made himself their enemy, and men like Briggs didn't stop until someone was in the ground. They came back 3 nights later. No headlights this time, just the soft crunch of tires on gravel and the faint glint of metal under the moonlight. Ethan had been waiting. The rifle rested across his lap, coffee gone cold on the table beside him. When the door rattled under a heavy boot, he was already moving. The first man through was the one with the chain. Ethan met him in the doorway. One hard shove sent him back into the yard, chain clattering against the dirt. The second man swung the shotgun up, but Ethan's shot came first. The blast echoed across the open land, scattering a roosting bird. Into the night. The man dropped to his knees, weapon falling from limp hands. Briggs was behind them, crouched low, a pistol in his grip. "You can't win this, Cole!" he shouted. Ethan stepped into the yard, breath slow, eyes locked on him. "Not trying to win." Briggs hesitated, confusion flickering. Then Ethan fired again. The bullet tore through the dirt inches from Briggs's boot. "Leave her," Ethan said, voice flat, "or the next one doesn't miss." For a long moment, only the wind moved. Then Briggs dropped the pistol into the dust and stepped back toward his truck. His men followed, one limping, one clutching his arm where the chain had grazed him. They drove off without another word. Ethan stood in the yard long after the sound of the engines faded, the smell of gunpowder hanging heavy in the air. When he finally turned, she was standing on the porch, barefoot, eyes wide, but dry. "They're gone?" she asked. "For now." She stepped down into the yard, stopping a few feet from him. "You could have let them take me." He shook his head. "Could have. Didn't." They didn't speak again. Instead, he walked past her to the barn, fetched a shovel, and buried the shotgun in the far corner of the field. She stood there watching. Not the act itself, but the way he moved, steady and unhurried, like a man who had made peace with whatever came next. By dawn, the sky was streaked in pale gold, the air still holding the bite of night. He saddled the mare, tied 2 bedrolls to the back, and filled the canteens. She watched from the porch, her face unreadable. "We're leaving?" she asked. "Yeah." He didn't tell her where. Didn't need to. Anywhere was better than here now. They rode out in silence, the ranch shrinking behind them until it was just another shape on the horizon. The only sounds were the creak of leather, the soft thud of hooves on dry earth, and the wind moving through the grass. Once, she glanced back over her shoulder, just once, then faced forward again. They didn't talk about what had happened. They didn't need to. Some things stayed between the land, the sky, and the 2 people who had survived the night. Weeks blurred into months. They moved like shadows across the back roads. Small towns, long stretches of nothing, nights under open skies, never staying in one place long enough for questions to grow. Ethan worked where he could, fixing fences, breaking horses, mending roofs. She stayed close, learning the work without being told. Her hands grew stronger, her shoulders straighter. The hollow look in her eyes faded, replaced by something steadier. She told him her name one evening, by a creek lined with cottonwoods. He didn't repeat it, just nodded, as if he'd always known. In the winter they found a cabin high in the hills. The roof leaked, and the stove coughed more smoke than heat, but it was theirs for the season. Snow fell thick, muffling the world into a silence even deeper than the plains. Sometimes they talked. More often, they didn't. The bond between them lived in smaller things, the way he poured her coffee before his own, the way she checked the locks without being asked, the way they could read each other's thoughts in a glance. Neither of them spoke about that night on the ranch, or the men who had come for her, but both knew the shadow of it still trailed behind them. One morning, as the snow began to thaw, Ethan saddled the mare and handed her the reins. "She's yours now," he said. The girl, no, not a girl anymore, ran her hand down the horse's neck. "You're not coming?" "I'll be around," he said. "But it's time you had your own road." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. No tears, just understanding. Before she left, she reached into her coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. She placed it on the table without explanation. When she was gone, Ethan unfolded it. It was a drawing, rough, done in pencil, of the ranch porch on that first morning, him standing there, her at the fence. He set it on the windowsill, where the light caught it. Outside, the snowmelt ran in narrow streams down the hillside, carrying winter away. Ethan sat back in his chair, listening to the slow drip of water, the creak of the cabin settling, the distant sound of hoofbeats fading into the hills.